partly goes to the question of modernization too. Now, one of the questions that was asked in our factory, maybe, I'm sure, you know, is the impact of WTO on all of this. So in the end, once Russia's in the WTO and you know, things develop, I mean, this could be could prove more challenging for places like Kaluga, and that would really have to, you know, encourage the Russians in the sense, I think, to produce, you know, more themselves and manufacture more themselves instead of assembling something that's manufactured somewhere else. But that's probably further down the road.
Yeah, you know, that question did come up at the Volvo factory.
Yeah.
And our tour guide said, you know, we tried building some of the engine components in Russia, but the failure rate was so high that we decided it wasn't cost effective. It was cheaper to, you know, produce them in Sweden or Germany or wherever, import them and assemble them here, and then, you know, sell the trucks.
And let me just come back to the question of migration. I mean, the governor of Kaluga, right, with whom we met a couple of times, he did talk about, you know, migrants who work there, right, and sort of the challenge of integrating, you know, people from Central Asia and maybe the South Caucasus into the whole workforce there. So he seemed to be one of the.
Yeah, well, because, you know, Kaluga is going to be this kind of economic motor for the country, that it needs workers, and, you know, those workers have to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
Jeff Golson, Nobel Society Foundation. A comment and a question. I guess the comment is, it struck me as pretty disingenuous for Putin to say that he wants to have elections of governors once the political scene is modernized, when the system he's created is preventing new parties from developing. The question is, when you met the Russian experts and they said they were going to vote in protest, what did they expect to come out of this? Was this just an I'm fed up and I want to show it, or did they expect that United Russia would take some action? Or is there something in their mind, an alternative they would like to be able to vote for but can't?
Well, I think obviously it depends on the people. I mean, because I was a little surprised, and I had this discussion then, this was outside of the Valdai group, but with some young people whom I met, kind of children of colleagues and things in Moscow, and people saying they wanted to vote for the communists. I said, you really want, you know, do you believe in the communist platform? And they said no, but, you know, we want to protest and the communists are an alternative party. I'm not sure whether they thought this is going to influence what United Russia did. I think it was more, again, going back maybe to what happened on September the 24th, saying, you know, we want something different, and we don't want them to think if they can stand up there and tell us, okay, this is how it's going to be in the presidential election, and, you know, you're all going to vote for United Russia. I think a lot of it, in my sense, was a protest, not that they, I mean, I did talk to a couple of people who were attracted by the program, let's say, of Just Russia, again, a sort of more social democratic program and things like that. But I think it's less, in my sense, it was less the kind of, if you like, the ideology or the party platform, but just that it was an alternative. And then, of course, there were people, but then there was a lot of frustration that, of course, there were a number of parties that couldn't register. I mean, Jeff's already talked about that. We did have Nemtsov and Ryzhkov at the Kaluga conference. But, of course, I think what they were advocating was spoiling the ballot, and I guess you've seen some of that. You've probably looked at that more closely than I have on Sunday, but there was some of that. But I don't think it's that people have a real sense of what the alternative should be, and obviously not a lot of people who, you know, for instance, didn't vote for Yabloko as an alternative. They could have, because Yabloko is an alternative. So they obviously didn't think that that was, you know, they look upon Yabloko also as maybe being a museum party. I mean, it's been around a long time. Did you have any more sense of that?
Yeah, I mean, just on people voting for the communists, I mean, I think the idea is that, you know, these are the real opposition, you know, whereas, you know, Just Russia and the Liberal Democrats are kind of the systemic opposition. They're, you know, kind of window dressing, whereas the communists, you know, whatever you have to say about their program, and Zhirinovsky was very clear that, you know, we are not a social democratic party. We're not going to modernize along the lines of the European social democratic left. You know, nevertheless, is a kind of real alternative that has a political constituency, and at least I can foresee circumstances under which could have a, you know, a real political role. Whereas, you know, with a party like Yabloko, I think the sense is that, you know, they need help to get over the 7% barrier, and they're kind of living in the past as well.
David Fishman, visiting scholar, Johns Hopkins Concise. This is probably a follow-on question. Based on your time at Valdai, a little bit before the election, how did the results that showed up on Sunday, Monday, comport with what your gut instinct was, how it was going to be? Was there more of a trend towards the opposition and in any particular direction of a populist or social democratic direction? Was it about what you expected, or how would you give an overview?
I mean, based on what was being written over the last couple of weeks, I don't think I consider myself particularly surprised that United Russia did what is considered poorly, and even got under 50%. Now, I think the question is how closely do the official results tally with what actually happened, and I don't have a good sense of that yet. In that sense, I don't think I'm particularly surprised. I think there was a lot of grumbling among the people we talked to that, the decision of Putin to come back was kind of an admission that, we don't know where to take this. We don't know where the political system needs to go. We're out of ideas. And there's a sense of frustration that comes out of that. I think, if you look at Russian society, it's fairly dynamic. The economy, I think, is more dynamic than sometimes we give it credit for. And there's just this, enormous sense of frustration with the political system that I think is holding back a lot of that dynamism. And it's unclear where that frustration is ultimately going to be channeled. It was shortly before we were there, they had the Ruski March, the sort of nationalist march through the streets, and it wasn't just the kind of, unwashed skinhead types. I mentioned Navalny before. I mean, he was participating in the Ruski March. So, what that relationship is a little bit unclear, but I think, there is this sense that there's this big and growing segment of the population that is frustrated with the political status quo and doesn't quite know how to channel that opposition into anything, to bring about change, but, it's percolating below the surface, and I think something is going to happen with it eventually.
I mean, I think the only maybe surprising thing is, given the fact that we know, obviously, that large numbers of people working in different places were, let's say, encouraged to vote for United Russia, that's the result. I mean, irrespective of what people really believe, it's interesting that, in fact, United Russia didn't get more votes. Yes.
A question actually kind of related to that. I mean, do you think that this is now set sort of the events of this past weekend have set things in motion for a potential, kind of change or something that's kind of has been percolating for a while, or do you think that other events will need to take place? And also on that kind of same note, I was just wondering, interested in your ideas of how much the votes have been, how just they were. There have been a number of reports, circulating about that, and just interesting.
Whether the elections are a harbinger of change, I mean, I suppose that depends on what you mean by change. Something that did come up during the discussions with the political party leaders was how come Russia hasn't had its Arab Spring movement. And for one thing, there hasn't been a spark, and in some ways, I suppose you can see the election perhaps playing a role in that spark. But there's this history of instability in Russia over the last 2 decades that I think the Arab world hasn't had. Plus there are differences in the economy and the demographics and everything else. But what the party leaders that we asked about this emphasized was that there's this history of instability, and people didn't want that. They don't want the 90s back. And so that, I think, leads them to be a little bit more, tolerant of the system's failings. Now, the question is for how long and what is the ultimate breaking point. I don't think we really have a good answer to that. In terms of the role of these elections, I think it'll be a big determining factor will be sort of what comes next. Does United Russia try to, do they falsify the results to the extent that they, maintain a large majority in parliament despite the fact that everybody kind of knows that they didn't actually win it legitimately? And then what happens in the presidential elections in March? If Putin doesn't win an outright majority, do they acknowledge that? What do they do about it? So I can there's a process of change that I think is underway, and this is maybe a step in it, but I don't see this as being, the fruit vendor who set himself on fire in doing this.
I mean, I agree with that. I just think, as a result of what happened on Sunday, I would be less sure now about exactly how the March election is going to play out, which, a few months ago one would have said there'll obviously just be one vote, they won't have to go to a runoff, and, it's all going to be fine. I don't know. I mean, if people were sending a message to United Russia, are they going to send the same message to Vladimir Putin? But I agree. I mean, nobody wants a colored revolution. I mean, they've had enough upheavals, in the last 20 years, or at least in the 90s. So I think if they can avoid that, they will. Yeah.
Hi, Angela. Great talking to you. Thanks very much for your comments, both Angela and Jeff. Very, very insightful, very helpful. Two questions. One looking back, one looking forward. Looking back, any commentary, anything about Georgia and Russia's position in the Caucasus? And looking forward, another way of phrasing the same question that's popped up the last 3 times. If given the results from Sunday, if Valdai were to take place in January rather than September, other than wearing your heavy boots, what would actually change in the course of the controversy? What would you expect Putin, the Russian government officials, and others to tell you in January in light of the electoral results, as opposed to what they told you in September, looking ahead to the Duma?
Well, it wasn't September. We just were at Valdai, right? It was November.
November.
It was later this year, which is also an interesting question.
Yeah.
It's normally always been in September, right?
Right.
And they did it November this year, I think precisely because they thought by then we would know what was going to be, who was going to be the candidate. I think that was one of the reasons. I mean, they also said because, Medvedev had this Yaroslavl forum, which he's had in September for a couple of years, and they didn't want that to come on the tail, end of the Valdai. But anyway, so we did have to wear our heavy boots. I mean, that was heavy. Georgia, it didn't really come up this time. I mean, the past years, we've heard from both Putin and Medvedev, right from the beginning, from 2004, Putin always said, Georgia was free to leave the Soviet Union, Abkhazia and South Ossetia were not traditionally part of Georgia, and they should be free to leave Georgia. So we've had that from the beginning. In 2008, the group was there after the war, so that was obviously discussed in more detail. And we've also heard from both Putin and Medvedev at different times, they're not going to deal with Saakashvili, nasty things about Saakashvili, obviously. But we didn't, unless I missed something, I didn't hear anything about that now. It's as if, not that it's been resolved, but nobody seems to think this is a big issue. In fact, there was really, Putin himself really didn't talk, nor was he really asked about the South Caucasus. I will say that he did praise Ramzan Kadyrov. So he went in, he talked about what a good job he was doing in Chechnya, that, Grozny, was razed to the ground and now to this beautiful city. And he did say, well, of course, the Chechens have somewhat different customs than Europeans do, but, he's doing a good job. And I'm not actually sure that anybody asked him about Kadyrov. I'm going to have to try and remember the context in which it came up. But Georgia didn't come up as a subject, so maybe that tells you something, that this is now, it's not a thing that, they even want to go into a big, rant about. I would have thought that if we were going to Valdai in January, there probably would have to be more questioning, given the results of the elections, about how do you justify, we really did, several people tried to ask this question, how do you justify doing this swap and then coming back to power for 6, maybe 12 years, given everything that's going on. And then, he was asked about the parallel with both Stolypin and Roosevelt, both of whom, of course, it was mentioned, died before. Stolypin was assassinated, Roosevelt obviously died in office, but before they could fulfill everything, to which Putin answered, now come on, are you giving me my funeral? But in various ways, the question was asked about the kind of longevity, how long should this go on? And maybe that those questions would be more pointed in January than they were, before the Duma elections. But I would have thought it would just be a difference maybe of nuance, not a major difference.
Yeah. I don't really have anything to add on Georgia. It didn't really come up.
Yeah.
if the meeting were to be held in January, I think the only thing I would add is to say that there would probably be more questions about political change, about, you know, the pace of political reforms and what are you going to do. You know, the results of this election clearly say something about the mandate that United Russia and perhaps, you know, you, Mr. Prime Minister, have to run the country. How are you going to react to these elections? What do they mean for your, you know, your political program, for what you intend to do, assuming you're reelected in your next term?
Other questions?
Yes, Elliot Frankenberger, former member of U.S. Council on Economics Education Study Group to Russia, and Fulbrighter and social studies high school teacher in Montgomery County. But I'm curious about the questioning format of Mr. Putin. Do you have to submit questions in advance? And you had, if not, then you said that the question about Iran was embedded in another question, and since you had 3 hours, I was just curious why it was not followed up with a more specific question.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure there's a good answer to that. There was a Turkish fellow who was there who wanted to ask him basically about all of the crisis areas in the Middle East. So asked kind of a 4-part question about, you know, Libya, Iran, Syria, Turkey, and, you know, Putin sort of went through them and like ticked off the boxes, but didn't really elaborate on any of them. And then just as, you know, he went around and picked people to ask questions, none of the subsequent questioners picked up on the Iran issue.
The question issue is interesting.
Okay.
In the past couple of years, the initial questions, I think there was some discussion beforehand, and then the rest of the questions, I'll just, you know, I mean, Putin picks the people whom he, you know, he chooses people to ask him questions, and I think, you know, that's up to him. But yeah, but most of them, the majority of questions are things that the individual participants want to ask, and they either get called on or they don't. And it's not predictable, obviously, in something like that. Who does get called on? Yeah.
Robert Frederick, the co-group and a former Ceres student here. This is for either of you. I was just wondering if Prime Minister spoke at all on Central Asia and the recent election in Kyrgyzstan and kind of turned back towards Russia looking at foreign policy.
He did. I mean, in the context of the Eurasian Union, I mean, obviously Kyrgyzstan, and I guess the Kyrgyz have said that they're going to join it anyway. So it came up in that context. I don't recall any other context.
Yeah, and then, like the Manas space issue wasn't raised at all.
Right. Didn't come up.
Stanislav Yazin, TSC Energy. I want to come back to your notion about growing frustration among people. So, and evidently, Mr. Putin would need to convince people, and he has until March to do this. So, in your opinion, what would be, or what tools does he have to do this? What specific sort of events can we expect, like shutting down the opposition outlets, I don't know, arresting, imprisoning opposition leaders, or spending, increasing budget spending on pensioners or military? So, what are his options?
Well, I mean, I'll just do 2 things. One of them is, yeah, I mean, pouring more money. I would assume that, you know, they'll pour more money into the system. So at least if people didn't vote for United Russia or against it because they feel that their standard of living is falling. I mean, obviously people have had to deal with the fact that their standard of living rose quite nicely until 2008 and it fell. I would certainly expect that. I don't know whether arresting more opposition people is going to help. I mean, the deterrent factor, I mean, I don't know what's happened to Navalny. Is he still in jail? He was
15
arrested.
15 days administrative.
I beg your
15 days administrative detention.
Okay, so he's in 15 days. So, so have quite a few people from the demonstration yesterday, they're still held.
200 detained, I don't know how many in with it.
Okay, so I don't know whether that acts as a deterrent. I would only say, it's interesting to me that in the last week, right, they tried to blame the West, right? The West is supporting all the opposition parties. I mean, it's fanciful to me to think that, for instance, the International Republican Institute is funding the communists, but I guess nobody asks questions like that. But it seems to me that blaming the West, maybe it doesn't have that resonance that it used to. You know, telling people if you vote for these opposition parties and opposition groups, if you demonstrate, it's because you're tools of the Americans or the European Union. It seems to me that doesn't really seem to help. So I would have thought, I mean, you can always say they can raise the fear factor, they can raise the specter of an external enemy, which is why people have to gather together and vote for Mr. Putin so that nothing bad happens to them. I'm not sure that that works anymore.
Yeah, I think that's right. You know, there's a generation for whom I think that still works, but it's getting fewer and fewer, and more of the electorate, I think, has just other concerns and isn't responsive to that. So in terms of, you know, what other tools are available other than cash handouts, you know, I think there are still the administrative resources, you know, short of actually arresting people and throwing them in jail, further manipulating access to the media, for example, you know, compromat, that kind of thing. And I'm sure, you know, we'll see more than a share of that. And then there's also the question of, will the voting and the vote counting meet some minimum level of freedom and fairness? You know, the Russian elections have always been kind of interesting because they haven't been, you know, really free and fair, but at the same time they've been, you know, they haven't been kind of your Soviet style, you know, mockery of the concept of elections. They do actually reflect more or less the popular support for a particular party or candidate. So, you know, how much within that very broad spectrum of how free and fair the elections can be, will they, you know, open them up more or narrow, or, you know, or do something else?
Okay. Oh, yes.
Yes, this went over independent so vis-a-vis what was briefly stated about money leaving the country, money which has been invested into production in Russia, and the profitability generating revenues that exit and go to places like Cyprus. And also as a political tool, did the subject come up at all with the Russian courts and the court system and its effect on people's confidence in government and in business and investment and so forth, and contract and the rule of law?
I don't recall. Do you?
No, I don't. Nothing's coming to mind.
No, I'm the subject of the problem. Good to you.
My name is Valdai Discussion Club. I'm a former student here at Ceres and working for the German Marshall Fund. I have two questions and different questions, but my first question is it's about the issue of United Russia mystically. And Dr. Mankoff mentioned people tend to discuss them separately and tend to treat the Mr. Putin and the United Russia separately. But recently we've seen, especially a lot of YouTube videos and a lot of protests and in the environment that were usually very supportive of Mr. Putin. And do you think these things are going to, lead to some changes in Mr. Putin? And I was able to watch first 30 minutes of the Valdai discussion on YouTube, and the question about are we going to see Mr. Putin 2.0?
Right.
It's not. And my second question is related to Sochi Olympics, and I was wondering if there was any discussion about the Sochi Olympics and overall situation in the North Korea.
You know, on the first part of your question, you know, if you saw the video, I mean, Putin said, you know, I'm not divisible. Basically, there is no, you know, you can't put me into two parts. There's just, you know, one Putin. So, you know, in terms of his relationship with United Russia and his he's such a known quantity in a sense that I don't think it's going to be difficult for him to sort of change his brand, as you will. And that was actually a term that came up a lot during the discussion, was brand. You know, that this brand has kind of outlived its usefulness. So in a way, again, it's kind of a question of political technologies more than of programs. But, you know, it's hard for me to at least think of, you know, Putin himself taking a kind of radically different turn from where, you know, he's been. Now, you know, with the caveat that I think the caricature of Putin that we often have isn't necessarily reflective of what Putin actually is, stands for, and has done. I mean, if you think back to the early part of Putin's presidency, you know, circa 2000, 2001, 2002, I mean, he was very, maybe pro-Western isn't the right way to describe it, but was pushing very hard for good relations with the West, particularly the United States, especially after 9/11. And that positive momentum kind of dissipated by, you know, 2003, 2004 for a variety of reasons. But, you know, I think why we should keep that in mind is because, you know, I think that some of the negative assumptions that we have about what's going to be coming out of Russian politics and Russian foreign policy with Putin coming back are not, you know, there's always a reason to prepare yourself for the worst case scenario, but I think, you know, it's worth keeping in mind that there are other possibilities out there. Second question was Sochi in North Caucasus. That didn't really come up.
No, but but he did talk about Kadyrov.
Yeah.
But he didn't talk about the Sochi Olympics at all. It didn't come out, and there's really nothing else on the North Caucasus.
Yeah, like the stop feeding the Caucasus debate, that didn't really come up either.
No, I mean, the only person who discussed it was Uranovsky, right?
Well.
But, you know, it's not worth it. You can write the script for what he said. But, yeah, but otherwise, they really didn't come up. As I say, I mean, neither the South Caucasus really nor the North Caucasus, which is interesting. Yeah.
Greg Miller, School of Service. Did you said that the reason that you were particularly in Kaluga was partially to see these factories that were the Volkswagen and the Volvo factories. Was there any informal discussion either during your tours or just with other people at the conference about particularly the automotive industry in Russia or I'm assuming you're at Volvo's heavy commercial vehicle plant in Kaluga. Was there any discussion of the commercial vehicle or automobile industry? I mean, Russia's supposedly the largest market for both in the fastest growing commercial vehicle sector. I mean, was there any discussion on how significant this might be in Russia?
There was a little bit of discussion about that at the Volvo factory. Somebody asked about the WTO and what its impact was going to be, and they mentioned that Russia was a very large market for commercial vehicles, and that was part of the reason that they wanted to locate a plant in Russia. On the WTO and the impact on the auto industry, I mean, they tried to. It seems more as a challenge that it means that we're going to have to up our standards. We're going to have to become more competitive. But about the auto industry in general, not as much. More sort of where Volvo fit into the niche that they were filling and what they were doing in Russia. I don't know if it was different at Volkswagen.
No, I don't think there really wasn't that very much. I mean, it was more, when you go around plants like that. I mean, the thing was, when you and I both went to what do you call it, the laser packaging factory, and we had a scientist who'd been, was a nuclear scientist or some kind of, anyway, high-tech scientist take us around. The person who took us around the Volkswagen plant was, a young woman who was just doing the tour, but she didn't, she wasn't well versed in in a lot of other questions that people might have had. So you may have had someone different take you around the Volvo factory. But
no, it was the same thing. It was somebody from the public relations side.
Yeah, exactly. So if the PR person takes you around, there's a limit, and they don't really then want to. They're not well versed in these WTO questions. Yeah.
I have a question about FDI, and you mentioned that in Kaluga, the governor was the person who did sort of presentation.
Yeah.
Who is eventually responsible? Who is making decision on FDI in Russia? Is it regional